Lucas Anthony Wolfe, welcome to Laugh Your Cry Out. So this little book I finished last night. So I want to commend you on a couple things. One of which is it's pretty damn hard to write a book to begin with, much less a memoir about depression and suicidal ideation and all the things. I do want to start with how encouraged I was when I first started reading, because one of your first sentences that made me laugh out loud was, "Nothing against the Kardashians, but I'd rather get punched in the face than watch their show." So I thought, oh, I love this dude already. So that's a good start. And then you have a little bit of Holden Caulfield going on with, hey, I'm not going to blame society and all that nonsense, which I thought was great because I'm a big Salinger fan. So he had a little Holden without the bitterness. So let me just point that out. So that I really enjoyed your memoir, and I wanted to start with that as someone who's written a memoir, and I know how hard it is. And kudos to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And especially because I was really going for a non-bitter attitude. So it's a heavy topic, so I wanted to throw in some stuff that was a little bit lighter that could get people to laugh. Because, part of the reason I even wrote this was because I was reading a lot of books about depression and recovery, just as I was going through what I was going through and trying to come out on the other side of it. And a lot of them were they were either dry and boring, or they seemed kind of bitter, and that wasn't really helping me.
No, I'm with you. And I've done the same thing because I've suffered over the years, and not every book, but a lot of the books you read are very, very sullen and very dark. And so that wasn't helping. It's like I did like the fact that you also made a joke about how your descent into madness is pretty damn entertaining. And I think, as I shared with you in my brief email back and forth to you, is that the whole purpose of this platform is to do exactly what you're attempting to do as well, which is to shine some light on some darkness with a little bit of humor, right? Where you can laugh at yourself and some of the behaviors, waking up in a closet, all those kind of things that help you understand, like you are fallible. And I think that the twist for you that was really unique for me is that the title says it all, My Perfect Life, right? So you grew up with a really cool family. And I want to commend that to begin with. Your parents sound really cool. Your mom and dad being really supportive and understanding, and the fact that they had a big obstacle in their own life. You guys were born premature, you and your twin brother, Joe.
Yep.
And then Gabriel obviously suffered, was it monococcal meningitis?
It was pneumococcal meningitis.
Pneumococcal meningitis at 11 months.
Yep.
And he obviously was a big factor into your life and a huge piece of this book that was really touching. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your dad and your mom and Gabriel and Joe?
Yeah. So, both my parents, they grew up in sort of the typical post World War II style family. And they were on the poorer side, kind of lived sort of scrappy. And they were real big on wanting to give us a better life, good education, real big on family time. They always wanted to make sure that we had family dinner around the table, not watching TV during dinner time, that kind of thing. And they were strict. I mean, they were tough parents. I'll give them that. But I always tell them, I never doubted for a minute of my life whether they loved me, or whether they would give their last breath for me. So I think that's about as good a job as you could do as a parent. So they were great parents, and they were very helpful with what I went through, because they didn't poo-poo it. They didn't try to pretend that it was something that it wasn't. They didn't know what it was either. And, neither did I when I finally called them. I go through it in the book, but I go through a couple years of fighting this depression before it really breaks me, and I reach a point where I realized I needed some help, and I called them, and they were very receptive to that. So that was really great.
And this started for you, what, junior year in high school? You started to notice a change in your brain?
Yeah, yeah, it was about my junior year in high school, and really the best way that I knew how to describe it was that it just felt like something was off.
Mhm.
It just felt like something was out of alignment, and it was so easy to just say, "Well, I'm a teenager," and everybody says that teenagers feel this way, and we go through phases, and maybe I'm going to college soon, and there's just a million things that could explain why I felt a little bit off. And I just couldn't put the words to it, except for the suicidal ideation. That I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know that that was like a normal thing that people struggling with depression went through. I just thought I was nuts, right? And like I said,
Yeah.
my perfect life, I had a great life. In my mind, I had just no reason to be depressed. And so I didn't know how to talk about that, how to explain what was going on with me.
And did you early on, because you mentioned earlier in your book that it was a slow moving train, right? That kind of, I'm paraphrasing you, but
Yeah.
it started slowly. And did you have suicidal ideation as early as high school? Or you just have like a fog that started
I
that eventually became much more drastic?
So I actually did have you know what, I think it was more intrusive thoughts. And I sort of described them later from like my senior year when I would just see myself in my mind's eye, jumping off a building or, dead in a bathtub or something like that. That was happening to me, not as frequently, but that was happening in my junior year of high school.
In high school?
Yeah. And I mean, it's a pretty scary thing when you're 16, 17 years old and you don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
You kind of just want that to stop happening. You don't
Yeah.
particularly want to tell anyone about it.
No, you're supposed to be thinking about girls and sports and having fun with your buddies and maybe getting a driver's license and a new car. Yeah. Not
Yeah.
actually offing yourself like some kind of suicide mob figure who's
Right.
about to go to trial.
Right.
And then you actually had the same, because you have a really vulnerable story when you and Joe and your dad went to Penn State for the first time to watch a game. And you
Mhm.
walked over, you guys were in the nosebleed seats, and you walked over to the end and you started looking over. And that was again where you were like, I could do this. I could end it right here.
Exactly. And it was so bizarre to me. And it was another, I guess, component that I didn't understand of depression, because I thought that if you were depressed, it was like a mood that you felt 100% of the time.
Right.
You were always depressed until you got better. And I didn't realize that it kind of comes and goes in waves. And so, that day that I visited Penn State with my dad and my brother, and I grew up in a Penn State family, right? My
Yeah.
papa went there, my dad went there. So I heard about this place my whole life. So I was pumped to get to go see it. And I absolutely fell in love with it, loved being there, loved seeing the football. And so this was one of the best days of my life, right? And on one of the best days of my life, I just casually am looking out over the stadium, and I realized that there's a part of me that wants to just jump off of it. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was like, "Well," he was just curious. He was like, "Well, is it that thing when you are like high up and
Right.
because that's." I forget exactly, but it's a phenomenon that actually has a name. And I was like, no, no, no. I was like, I have felt that, and I'm telling you, this was totally, completely different. And it was a very bizarre thing, and yeah, that scared the heck out of me too.
And that was, well, you were still, you were a senior in high school at that point, or were you actually about to go into Penn State?
I was a junior in high school, and that was like our first like college
Okay.
visit.
So that all
Mhm.
happened. And then you got accepted, went to Penn State,
Yep.
and it was still there. And did it start increasing as far as frequency and the depth of the depression? Was it getting worse, like as a freshman when you got there?
Yeah, it for the most part, it pretty much steadily got worse. I would say maybe my freshman year of college was when I felt the most free of it, because everything was so new, and I was just, I was just having a good time making new friends. The the first girl that I met ended up becoming my girlfriend like a month into college, and then I ended up marrying her a few months ago.
Congrats on that, by the way. That's Erica, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's Erica. Yeah. So that was pretty cool. So I really had a good time my freshman year, and it really wasn't until the end of the year that I started to really feel the depression again. And it was because um I was always able to kind of push it off all those years, right? So like when I first started feeling it in my junior year of high school, I convinced myself that it was because I was a teenager and it was stress from thinking about my future, thinking about college, thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, because I wasn't sure. And it seemed like a lot of other people were. And so I thought, pretty reasonably, once I figure this out, I'm not going to feel lost anymore, and I'm not going to have these other feelings. Well, then I get into college, and then at the end of my freshman year, I went into college undecided. I took a bunch of classes, but I kind of leaned engineering. And at the end of the year, I decided to go into chemical engineering. So those were two big things that I thought when I got those sorted out, the depressive feelings would go away. And when they didn't, then they started to get worse, right? Because the thing that I thought was going to cure me didn't. And that upped the anxiety, and that upped the realness of it. And that, then I had to move the goalpost again, and I had to pick something else that was going to fix me. And I talk about that a bit. That's when I decided, okay, well, once I get an internship and I graduate, I'm going to feel better.
Right.
And I don't think it's a bunch of a spoiler that didn't quite work out that way.
Well, the internship in New Mexico was a very interesting story. And the visuals were great. I think that some of the death that occurred in that camp, I actually walked by a Ford 150 pickup truck when I took my little boy skiing the other day and looked at how big it was. And that story you shared about those huge trucks that just ran over one of those trucks, as it was leaving the quarry was just, because I've seen those things. They're like 30 feet tall. The wheels are, the size of like three different cars. And your boss sounded like a total dick. So,
yeah,
right?
He was
not a nice guy. And I love that you went at him at the end with your review. And he was like, well, there's certain things that we really didn't do, and you didn't answer anything. And you're like, what questions? What questions? And he was like, yeah, no, it's too late. You're screwed. Like,
yeah. I was so mad in that review, man. I really was.
Well, and then that was part of what you were talking about. As a young man, you're putting everything on the internship because you weren't getting great grades because you were obviously struggling mentally. You shared with, you're 52 on your first Chem E class and a couple other areas where you're like, yeah, I'm not hitting this. And by the way, before I continue, did you eventually started to like chemical engineering, right?
Yeah. It was always something that interested me.
Yeah.
And I still, I had a love-hate relationship with it for sure. Cause it was kicking my butt, man. I was just getting
I can't
whacked.
even imagine.
Yeah. And it was like, even if the average was a 50, I still got like a 35. Right? And it's just like, oh, that's demoralizing when you put like 100 hours into something and you get 35. Like, so yeah, there were definitely times that I was like, not loving the major.
Yeah. Well, back to your internship. So what happened with the sulfuric acid and how it got in your body? Like, why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because, as far as like the byproduct of your depression and mistakes, that was a story that I actually laughed at. Not at you, but I was like, oh my God, that's got to be one of the most embarrassing things to ever happen at an internship.
That's why I put it in there, because I remember even at the time thinking, this is hysterical. I mean, this is messed up, but this is pretty funny. So when I got this internship in New Mexico, it was maybe 6 years into the depression, and I really started to have some bad symptoms, and one of them was brain fog. And again, I didn't know that that's what it was called at the time, but it felt like just burning sludge going through my head. And I mean, when I say it hurt to think. It hurt to think. It was like I just was out of it, and and a whole bunch of other stuff gets messed up with your body, right? So I wasn't eating right. I couldn't sleep, blah, 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 blah. So I am just in total pain, and I'm in New Mexico, and I'm on this thing called a leach pad. And it's basically where they just have these long hoses that have little holes in them. And it just sprays a very light sulfuric acid solution that pulls minerals out of the rock, which is called ore, and it just puts it down into a big pool basin and drains it off, and then they do a bunch of stuff with it. So I'm up on these leach pads for my project, and I'm taking measurements, and I'm just crouched up against this really big boulder because I feel like I'm going to pass out. And you had to wear
a whole shitload of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Like, yep, yeah, you had to wear
heavy like gear,
all kind of crap. You had to have. I mean, so I got long sleeve, heavy shirt. It was like having a winter jacket on with like a hat and goggles and long pants and boots and gloves. Except it's the middle of July. I'm at 6,000 feet elevation in the New Mexico desert. It's getting cooked under the sun. And sulfuric acid smells like rotten eggs, so that's not making it any better, right? No. So I'm crouched up against this boulder because I feel like I'm going to pass out. My head feels like it's swimming. I feel like I'm dying. It's terrible. And I can feel sweat running down my back. But as I'm sitting there getting this measurement, and I need to sit there for about a minute or two to get the full thing, I realize that it feels like a lot of sweat is running down my back. And it felt like enough that it was pooling in these like really cotton starched pants, right? So it was like my pants almost poofed out into this like container. And I could feel how wet it was getting there. And I was like, this is messed up, man. But I didn't want to stand up because I was afraid I just wasn't going to be able to get back down and finish it. So I just sat there and I sat there and I sat there. And then I stood up. And when I stood up, I realized that I had accidentally moved a hose that was over that boulder, and sulfuric acid was just dripping into my pants the entire time. And so when I stood up, just went all over me, man. And I was burning and everything. And so I hightailed it back to the truck. And my goal was to try to get to a wash station, but zero chance of that happening. And so I just went into a reflex mode, and I just took off my boots, ripped off my pants, ripped off my boxers, took off the shirts, and I was just naked in the back of a work truck at this job. And I was like, I hope nobody comes by. And I had a sweaty tank on underneath my shirt, and I just used that to wipe all the sulfuric acid off of me. And then, oh my God. Then I was in the back of the truck doing that. And I was like, if somebody comes by here, I'm just naked in the back of a truck right now. Like, I'm going to get fired.
There's the new intern. And by the way, I don't know anything about sulfuric acid, but when you say burn, what is it doing to your skin?
You know what it felt? It felt like a colony of fire ants had broke apart in my pants. And it felt like it's a stinging, burning, biting sensation. Now it's a very light sulfuric acid solution. If it was heavy, that would be very, very bad. Yeah. But it was light, so it was just it's very irritating, is what it is. Mm-hmm.
Well, and then you met a really amazing young lady named Sarah there, right? What was that relationship like, and how did she help you get through this internship?
Well, Sarah was great because one of the things that unfortunately we're all finding out over this last year is that isolation is brutal, especially if there's already kind of some underlying condition. If you're already on your way downhill and then you get isolated, that's just awful. And I really was very isolated in New Mexico until Sarah got on the job. And
Was she a college
I
kid
don't
too?
know. She
Sorry to
was.
interrupt. Okay.
No, she was the same age, and she was just cool. I mean, she was just a normal person is the best way I know how to explain it. You know, we just hung out. We talked about random stuff. We, swapped funny stories from college. You know, we worked together. And it was nice. And I didn't feel like I was the last person on the planet when her and I hung out. And that really helped keep me afloat that summer because I was drowning. And the way that my mindset was I needed to finish this internship. I couldn't go home early. I just couldn't do it.
And did you share with her what you were going through, or you just left? You kind of kept that hidden.
I kept that hidden. I kept that hidden, and I still didn't even think of it as depression at the time. I didn't know. And I had just kind of come to terms with the fact that whatever was happening to me was inevitable and unfixable. And I was just trying to make it as long as I could. It was kind of in my mind, it was predetermined that I was dead. It was just a matter of how much longer am I going to make it before that happens.
And is this the first time you were isolated? Because at Penn State, I assume you had buddies that you lived with, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How many roommates did you have?
I had 4 roommates.
Okay. So you didn't have a lot of isolation. Right?
No.
I mean, you guys, you're stacked on top of each other. You're broke. You're playing video games, drinking beer, eating shitty food. But
100%.
Yeah.
And
so none of those dudes knew either, right? You didn't share that with them or your brother.
Correct. Yeah. I didn't share it with anyone. And it was a lot easier to hide than what people think. I'm the last person, right, that people would think of as depressed. I mean, I was just always bouncing off the walls, never wanted to stay in, on Friday or Saturday night. I didn't care what was going on. I was like, unless you are deathly ill, like, we're going out, we're having a good time. I was always getting people together to party and to be social and just to go do things. So to think of me as depressed, it just didn't make any sense. And so it was very, very easy to hide that.
But you were reading a lot about this at this point. Were you diving in to find out what was going on in your head, or talking to anyone?
I was not. I would do some searches on the internet. I talk about that one story that I saw in my junior year about a young woman that went to UPenn, Madison Holleran. You might not have heard of her all the way out there on the West Coast, but it was a pretty big story over on the East Coast because it was just, she was just like me, right? Had a great life, had a great family, had a great home, had incredible grades, and seemed to be going places, and showed really not much signs, not many symptoms, right. And then just kind of out of the blue. And as I was reading her story, I just, even though I still didn't think of myself as depressed, I knew whatever happened to her was happening to me. And you would think that would be the point that I would reach out and tell someone, but I still just wanted to beat it. I didn't want to have to admit that this was happening.
And that was more of a weakness thing? Did you think it was weak?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I thought it was weakness. I was embarrassed by it. A whole host of things. Cause, and it's complicated, right? And I think sometimes we try to oversimplify it a little bit and just say that it's stigma. And that, don't get me wrong, that's a massive component of it. But it is also extremely personal, right?
Yeah.
It really is a very personal experience. And even if you're not embarrassed by it, that doesn't mean that you just want to share one of the most personal things you've ever gone through with random people, right? You know, we're not quite that open all the time.
No, I had a misapprehension. I assumed, and this, you know, when you assume, you always screw up, but I assumed your generation was a little different than mine, right? My generation was more John Wayne, James Bond, you know, like man up, like be who you are, just suck it down. I don't know if you ever watched Bill Burr, the comedian, but
oh, love Bill Burr.
Right. I mean, he just crushes that on that front. He's like, you know, he was on a plane and they thought the plane was going to crash. And he's like, you know, I was scared shitless and I was talking, and he goes, and there's a guy like 3 belows behind me. And he's like whining, like crying, like a little girl. And he goes, and I turned back and I was just like, man, shut up, just shut up. And the only people that should be saying this are chicks and little children. Like, be a man, you know, just own it. He's like, push your feelings down. And he goes, act like you have all the answers. Be a man. You know, I'm just laughing as I hear him talk about this, because that's exactly what I was taught, right? So Bill Burr's my age. He's in his 50s. And every time I watch him, I laugh because he makes fun of our machismo, right? As, you know, our gender, we're supposed to just forget it. Push everything down. Don't worry about it. And I love the fact that he says, you know, pretend you have all the answers, because that's very typical of dudes, right? Like, I got this, you know, even if we have no idea what we're doing. But yeah, I actually had to look up Madison. I didn't know who she was. And one of the things that struck me about the story was that her whole goal in life, she was obviously an academic to get into UPenn. Mm-hmm. And she was a Division I, or I don't know, not Division I, but a great athlete. And then she competed, which was her goal, to compete in track in college, right? And so she got there and she competed in college. And so that was even more of a mystery. She got into her favorite university. She competed at the collegiate level. She didn't have any signs early on. And then even her friends were saying, you know, hey, it's okay. This happens as freshmen. You know, we're scared to be away from our parents, our hometown, our network, if you will. You don't feel as safe anymore. But, you know, there's a lot of that, I think, that touches on celebrity in general. You know, because when you do achieve success, you've talked in your book about making it, you know, which everyone talks to. Oh, when I make it, I'll be fine. You know, and I went through a lot of the same shit with my own depression. Was that I suffered from chronic anxiety, much more so than I suffer from depression. And depending on how anxious I get, it can, if I have numerous panic attacks over a week, my brain will just crash. It'll be like, hey, I'm telling you, you got to chill out, man. And I'm like, I can't, I got things to do. And he's like, no, I'm telling you, dude, like, I'm going to shut off. I'm like, off, and you're done. And when that happens, I get, you know, that migraine you had at your internship where you just didn't think you could make it. I have those. Even when I wrote my book, I would get these rushes of panic, and then I would try to shove it down and deal with it. And I have 2 little kids, 2 little boys. And sometimes it would get so bad that I couldn't interact. I'd be like, guys, I got to go lay down. Daddy's got a headache, you know, and then they would come over and hug me and tell me they love me. And, you know, it was, and it didn't pierce it. You know what I mean? You know, you're in a hole when your little boys are telling you they love you and there's no emotion. It's just that, you know.
Yeah. There's just all the vitality is just gone.
Yeah, it's gone. Yeah. Anhedonia, I think is what it's called. But yeah, you're just flatline. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that was just a tragic story. I have too many of those in my own personal life. My buddies have lost kids to suicide. We're seeing a lot more of it now, you know, with COVID. Kids that are absolutely isolated. And they have, you know, I don't know if I sent you a little bit about my own depression. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but
yeah, I did. I read through it.
Mm-hmm. So my older brother suffers from chronic depression. He's on heavy Zoloft. Has been for 20 years. My little brother was bipolar. So I get this stuff, you know. I think that the empathy that I have, and I'm thankful for my own depression, because at least I know to some level, like when I read your novel or your memoir, and when I talk to other folks that are suffering, I can relate. I can be like, oh man, dude. And then when you crawled out of the hole, how'd it feel? And you're like, oh my God, it felt so good. It was like the sun, the sun again. And, and I liked, I wanted to eat and I wanted to talk to people and I wanted to, be social again. And, that's a big part of it, and I know that you went through all these machinations, even before you went and got help. And when did you actually go meet John, your therapist? What year was that?
So it was after my senior year of college. So let's see, it was 2015 was when I went and saw him. And I went for one semester for super senior year. So it was the fall of 2015 that I met John.
Okay. And were you still at school or you were graduated already?
So I failed a couple classes in my sophomore year. Yeah. So I had to go. Dude, I was so close too. I know. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. I thought he would give it to you, but what are you gonna
do? And he gave me some I got nothing against the guy, but he gave me some bad advice because I was like, I think I should drop the class and just register for the one in the fall. And he was like, I think you should stick it out. And if you get close enough, we'll see. Got real close. Then he didn't give it to me. And then the class in the fall was filled up. So I had to wait a year to take it in the spring. And then that meant I had to go to college an extra semester. I was like, that was not helpful advice, man.
No, and that's a kick in the nuts when you're depressed too, right? You're like, I don't need this. I need some happy in my life right now.
Seriously.
I don't need to flunk. Yeah.
So I was in my final semester of college. And I still had a couple hard classes, but it was nowhere near as hard as the last 2 years had been. And I was still very much just, the person that just wanted to bulldoze through everything. And so I stayed in. John was thinking that really I should withdraw for a semester and kind of get my feet back under me. And maybe that's the right move for someone. And maybe that's what I would do now. But back then the better move for me was to really just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So that's what I did.
I liked him a lot. I think the one thing that you did a really good job in your book of comparing John to Sean in Good Will Hunting, which is Robin Williams. Sean was the psychiatrist that was dealing with Will. Mm-hmm. And when he came in and said, bullshit, you're a coward. Don't be a coward to Will, because he wasn't using his brain correctly. Did you have any parallels? You purposely used that story, but did you see that John was kind of similar? He was your Good Will Hunting Sean kind of guy?
He really was. I wasn't as resistant as Will, and he definitely didn't speak as academically as Sean did. But yeah, he would tell me to go F myself sometimes, and it was funny. And he would call me stupid and a moron, and it was funny. We laughed about it. And I think it was a good trait on his part, because do I think that he talks to everybody like that? No, absolutely not. But he recognized in me that what I needed was someone that wasn't going to treat me with kid gloves like I was broken. And so his ability to see that and to understand that and to talk to me in the way that would actually reach me. And then from there to help me deal with why I was depressed and with figuring those things out, was extremely helpful. And it was great because, right in the first time I saw him, he told me, he was like, your brain is going to tell you that you have no reason to be depressed. That's what depression does. It's a smart son of a bitch. Don't listen to it. And I was like, it was massively relieving to know that it wasn't some horrible moral failing on my part, that I wasn't, defective or broken, and that I could actually do something to improve my situation. And that's what I love to tell people. It's like, maybe it's not your fault that you're depressed, but you can own it and do something about it and get better. And that's not a guilt thing. That's not a individual responsibility shoving on you. To me, that was relieving, because I was like, oh, this thing that I felt completely powerless to change for years, you're telling me that there are steps that I can take, there are behaviors I can put in place, there are things that I could do, like coming to this talk therapy and grinding through some of this shit that's hard to figure out, and I can get better. Like, yeah, I'll do that. Like, that's great. Okay, it's hard. Fine. It's better than not having anything, you know?
How long did you go to talk therapy with him?
I went to talk therapy with him for 5 years.
Nice. Is it once a week?
Yeah. So I would say in the beginning, maybe the first 6 months, it was twice a week. Then it went down to once a week. And then maybe for the last 2 years, it was like once every 2 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, those those meetings are important, because when they say we need you to come in twice a week, that means you're in trouble. Because my therapist said the same thing to me. She said, you need to come in every week. Yeah. And you need to be here at 5:00, and you need to be here with a check. And I was like, a check? And she's like, you need to pay me every Wednesday at 5:00. And if you do not bring a check, you will not have your session. And you have 3 weeks to follow up and make up the session. And if you don't, you still pay for it. It's just gone. And if you do that twice, I will remove you as a patient. And I was like, wow. Oh, and I interviewed her, because she was like this badass who dealt with narcissism. My dad was a narcissistic personality disorder candidate. And so he did a lot of weird stuff to my family. So when I interviewed her, I said, well, can I just pay you up front? And she's like, no, Joey, that's the problem. You don't have any attention to yourself. You need to be attentive. You need to bring me a check. And because you need to bring me a check, you need to come in and think, what do I need to talk about today? I'm like, oh, I see what you're doing. And I loved her immediately, because she just didn't put up with my bullshit. And that's actually why I related to your boy, John, because he sounded hilarious. I liked his running shoes, his mismatched socks, and the whole, like, he just sounded like a character, right? And I was happy to hear you went to talk therapy, because I think the duality is really important. And then you also mentioned that you were he's a psychiatrist, right? Not a psychologist.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
he's got the like a pharmacology degree, so he could
prescribe meds.
Yes,
correct. Because that was the same as mine. I experimented with meds years ago, and it didn't work for me. But you started on Klonopin. That was one of the things he helped you for anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the pill you refused to take after the first time.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, this scene, I did laugh out loud, because you took the Klonopin, which when I took it, by the way, I had the same reaction. My brain started like tickling. Like I was like, holy shit, all this energy it woke my brain up, right? And then you got all emotional, and then you said, Dad, I'm a bitch. And then you cried on his shoulder, and then he laughed, and he said, oh, no, you're not. And he said, no, I'm a bitch. And then it was a great scene, dude. That was very heartwarming. And you had a very similar one with your brother, where you guys kind of, laughed about being vulnerable, which I thought was great.
Yeah. And I mean, and that was really funny, because, I talk about that too, and again, I've never thought of my parents as unloving. I've never thought of my dad as unloving, but the dude is Old Testament, right?
Right.
And so, and he knew I was wound up about this medicine. He knew I didn't want to take it. He knew I felt like a loser, like a total failure, like just dirt. And he was trying to make me laugh, with the medicine and stuff. And, when I took it, and then it's just, I don't know. I took it, and I was just overwhelmed, and I just started crying, and I was like, I'm such a bitch, right? And the two of us were just laughing. I mean, it was funny. And that's it. I think that's the thing that's also kind of cool about my story, and I can see that you appreciate is I didn't try to force myself to feel a certain way, right? Like, I was embarrassed about what I was going through. and I was embarrassed to have to take the medicine. And I didn't try to say to myself, oh, well, I shouldn't be embarrassed. I was just like, well, I am. I'm going to still do it. And that means I got to fight through, this humiliation that I'm experiencing. And I can do it. I can do it on my terms. Right. And so I call myself a bitch and we have a good laugh and I feel better. And they were good moments.
Now, that was a great moment for me because let me ask you this. You were embarrassed to do this. You're embarrassed to take the pill. You're embarrassed to admit it. Obviously, you've gone through a metamorphosis because not only you're not embarrassed, you wrote about it and told the world about it. And it's in writing, which means it's out there forever.
Yeah.
Right. So like, you can't pull that back, right? There's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube, right? That's it. It's out.
Exactly.
And when did that happen for you? When did you become not only not embarrassed about it, but you now want to go out and share, your story with others? When did that take place?
So that I started to want to share for a couple different reasons. One was, and I talk about this in the book too. I think one of the most powerful experiences I had in my recovery was talking to other people in my life who I did not know struggled with depression, and who I also would not have ever thought struggled with it because they were happy, they loved life. I could see that in them. And when we talked, and I knew, I could hear it in them that they understood what I was going through. I could hear it in their voice. And when they told me that there was something after, and just the compassion that they treated me with, that gave me faith in life after that kind of brokenness. And having that hope and that faith really helped me to hold on. And that was something that both of them said made it worth what they had to go through, because as you know, there's not much that would make going through depression worth it, right? No. But being able to help someone else through it is strangely one of the things that does make it worth it. And so then what happened was a couple months later, I graduated college. I'm, at work, and I see on Facebook that a junior at Holy Ghost, which was the high school that I went to, had committed suicide the night before. No signs, no symptoms, hadn't said anything to friends or family, out of the blue. And I reached out to the principal there, who was a teacher that I had when I was at Ghost. And I said, listen, you remember me. Nobody would have thought that this happened to me. Let me come in. Let me talk to the kids. Let me tell them that doesn't have to be this way. And he got back to me and he said, I had to do a double take when I saw your name in this email. And I had to make sure that this was actually you, because you're right. You are the last person that I would have thought struggled with this. And absolutely. And so I came in and I just gave a quick 15-minute presentation to the kids, and it went really well. A lot of them reached out to family afterwards and said that they were having a hard time, or they went to the counselor. There was just a good response from it. And I realized that, if I could help some people to not have to go through what I went through, then that would be worth it. And at the time, I was still very much embarrassed about what I went through. I remember my voice was cracking a little bit when I started giving this presentation. And I don't have a fear of public speaking, but it was just what I was talking about that was like getting me a little bit. And I just thought, maybe I can, what would that have done for me if I heard this when I was 16? And if the cost for me to help someone is to go through a little bit of embarrassment, that's not much of a cost at all. And once I kind of put it in those terms to myself, it was like, yeah, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to try to help people. And, whatever anyone has to say about it, that's just fine, because if it helps someone not go through what I went through, if it possibly saves someone's life, it's worth it.
And did you go to a high school and actually attend like an auditorium? Did they fill the gym with all these kids? And then you got up there and spoke to like 200 kids?
It was about 500 kids,
500,
somewhere between 400 and 500
they filled
kids.
the whole school.
Mm-hmm.
And you came in and told your story. Is this after you read this wasn't after you read or wrote your book?
Nope. This was the first thing I would say in my sort of public speaking and writing about mental health.
Got it.
It was kind of by the seat of my pants when I saw that this happened. I was like, I got to do something about this.
Yeah.
And like I said, it went well. And one of the guidance counselors at Ghost had heard of the organization Minding Your Mind, which does exactly this, right? They have speakers like me go into high schools, middle schools, community organizations, and give these presentations.
I think that's amazing. And that's actually what I was getting to with, the difference between our generations is that we didn't talk about this stuff when I was growing up. Even when my brother got it 20 years ago, when he first recognized he had it, we didn't talk about it. I assumed that the generation, you guys talked about it. I mean, you see it on social media, kids sing about it. I mean, Billie Eilish is obviously a very vocal advocate for depression and anxiety, and she talks about it, as do a lot of the singers. It's just still not talked about within your group, huh?
You know what? I think it's definitely talked about more with millennials than your generation. But I think it's really, I guess the next one is Gen Z. I think it's really a lot more with Gen Z than it is with millennials. Because like I said, I graduated high school in 2011. There was no mental health program. Nobody talked about it in the school. Nothing. I don't remember anything about it. And I see in high schools now, tons of, I think more high schools than not have some sort of program, bring in some sort of speaker or some outside group. It's part of the general health classes. They talk about mindfulness. And so it's cool because again, if I had maybe just a little bit of that general education, maybe I would have been able to say to somebody, look, I don't understand why, but this is happening to me. And I think we need to do something about it. I can't guarantee that I would have done that, but maybe I would have. And that's about the best that we can do. Right.
Yeah. I think that's why I reached out to you. I go online, I look for people who are writing about this and talking about this, and you were doing both. So I was like, oh, this young man should jump on my show. He shouldn't be ashamed. I still find it hard to get guests, right? Because the whole show, Laugh Your Cry Out, is to talk about anxiety and depression and things that are bubbling up in your life. Your non-social media persona, right? Like your real persona, not the food that you eat and the cool, Tahoe pad that you're staying in or whatever you're doing with your friends. It's like, this is where I'm going at. And it's hard. It's still hard for young people to come out and talk about it. For me, I didn't talk about it until late in life, just because of all of the stigma attached to it. I was insecure enough. I didn't want to throw that on top of the heap and say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm a mess. And I suffer from panic attacks. And if you witness one of those, you'll really think that's cool. You mentioned that you had up to 12 a week during your heyday.
Yeah.
And that's brutal, Dan, because they hurt. They physically hurt. They wipe you out for the remainder of the day sometimes. And how did you get through that? That's a shitload of panic attacks, dude.
I got to tell you, I don't think I realized, and I remember talking to my mom about this. I don't think I realized how much of a toll these things were really taking on me until I started to get better and I stopped having them for a while. And so I maybe went a couple months without one, and then I had just one, and I was just, it knocked me on my ass. And I was like, I don't know how. I was like, I honestly don't know how I did it. And I think it's just kind of one of those things, right? Everyone has some sort of time in their life that they look back on and they're like, I don't know how I did that, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's pulling all nighters to pass exams or, when you just had kids and they're up all night crying, and, you're juggling stuff and bills and everything. Like, we all can point back to something. And to tell you the truth, I don't know exactly how I did it. I think it was just because, I really was just laser focused on these things are going to make me better. And that's just what I did.
There's some power in not knowing too, right? I mean, 18, 19 years old, you think, at that point in your life, you do feel invincible. So you're big and strong and healthy. And so you're like, yeah, panic attack, whatever, I can get through it. And you also mentioned, and this is something I did for, a whole decade probably. I drank too much. I spent a lot of time in the ad business. In my 30s, it was the .com. I was at a small ad agency. We were kicking butt, working with all these cool companies in San Francisco. And so for me, the depression was there, but I could drown it temporarily. And in my early 30s, you could drown it and then feel good. And you mentioned this too, when you went out with your buddies, you would drink. You guys would go to First and get hammered and play pool and, karaoke and have fun because you wanted the madness to end, even if it was that night, right? And I think that's typical of like youth. You could like, oh, I'm going to pay tomorrow. Like I'm going to feel like shit, but I'm just going to have fun with my mates tonight. And this is going to be great. And for me, I quit drinking after I had kids. I went out to my buddy's bachelor party, I went to his engagement party with my wife, and I had never really drunk scotch, and it was like a scotch bar, and they had all these high end, fancy, smanchy stuff, and so they're like, "Hey, take 3 fingers of this and taste it," and I was like, "Okay," and I just got ripped. I mean, blotto drunk, fun drunk. I was happy and having a good time, but I woke up with the worst hangover I've ever had, and it wasn't just physical. I mean, it was pretty bad. And my wife told me that night, she said, "Hey, we're going to my cousin's tomorrow for the 3rd birthday party." It was her little boy, Alex. And I was like, "Okay, I'll go." And she's like, "You better stop drinking because you're going to this party." And I was like, "I got it. I'm fine." And I'm just getting hammered. And then I went to bed that night and had just these horrible nightmares about all the stuff that I did. None of it was true, but I thought I did all this assing out kind of thing.
Right.
And I woke up and she's like, "Okay, we're going and you're going. This is part of your punishment." I was like, "Oh, babe, no, you're going." And so I went to this party and I got there for maybe 10 minutes. And then I was like, I can't. And I actually went into Alex's little like race car bed and I just curled up in the fetal position. And I was like, "I'm done. I'm sorry. I can't attend the party. I'm not fun. I am wrecked." And it wasn't just like the physical, which was terrible, by the way.
Right.
It was the mental, they call it hangxiety or whatever, words you want to apply to it. But the mental was so bad that I'm a loser. I can't believe I'm still doing this. I'm 43 years old or whatever it was at the time. And I obviously have a problem. And she came in and she checked on me and she said, "How are you doing, babe?" And I said, "I'm done drinking." And she goes, "Okay.
Yeah. 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 Because
like any wife would say, yeah, we've all said that a million times.
Yeah.
I'm done." I was like, "I'm done." And I never touched another drop of liquor. I still drink wine and beer here and there.
Right.
But I can't do it. It's not just the physical, it's the mental. The mental hangovers are brutal.
I mean, that's impressive because it's not an easy thing to just stop like that. So,
well, I mean, my little brother was a raging alcoholic. So I have to, it's a good point to delineate there is that I think everything's on a continuum. I think depression's on a continuum. I think anxiety's on a continuum. Alcoholism. I quit because I'd gone through enough therapy, right, to actually love myself as a human being, not like an arrogant love of myself, which I was really good at, by the way. It was, okay, I deserve this. I'm madly in love and I have 2 little boys and I need to grow the fuck up. Like I gotta figure this out. And that was where it was for me. It was that, and I was seeing a therapist at the time and I was like, "Hey, I just did this last night and this isn't good." And she's like, "Yeah, no, it's not." you need to stop drinking. I was like, okay, I did. She's like, no, I mean, you really need to not ever touch. I'm like, I know, I'm done.
Yeah.
And
You're like, we're on the same page.
We're good. We're like this, But yeah, I finished, and when you wrote about that too, where after you guys went out, you woke up in the morning in the fetal position, and I related to that because that's exactly where you go, right? You just, I can't be here. I don't want to be here. I don't want the sun to come up. I just want to lay here and feel sorry for myself.
Exactly. But I think that's a really interesting thing that you said there about how you learn to actually love yourself and not in some arrogant way. And if I had to comment anything on society, and I touch on it a little bit in the book, it would be that is I think there's far too many of us that, love ourselves in a very arrogant way, or, we proclaim that we're perfect just the way we are. And I think that phrase comes from a good place. And I think its origin is from a good place. And I think it's been hijacked by people who don't want to accept any responsibility for themselves, right? It's kind of that, and I mentioned this too. It's kind of those people that are like, oh, if you can't accept me at my worst, then you don't deserve me at my best. And it's like,
yeah,
well, maybe your worst is unacceptable, and maybe your worst needs to be better, right? Like, it's like, maybe you need to not be an ass. And I have that attitude towards myself, right?
Yeah, me too.
And that was something that my therapist really helped me out with. That was something that John helped me out with. Is he was like, look, dude, like, you're just way too hard on yourself. Like, you just are. You just beat yourself up. You beat yourself to hell. You have to learn what is good about being Lucas, right? And until you can do that, you have to at least offer yourself kindness, right? And that was, to me, I'm like, dude, can you shut up with that crap? Like, but, and that's why it was important for him to be able to also say stuff to me like, go F yourself, because I knew it wasn't just some hippy dippy crap coming out of him. It was an actual real psychological principle that I had to offer myself the same kindness that I offered other people, that I was worth it, that I was worth having a good life. And you just said the same thing, right? Like, you figured out that, okay, giving up alcohol is hard, but I'm worth it. And the life that I want to have is worth making this sacrifice for. And I think that doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to mental health, right? Is like, there's a lot that we can't control, but there are those things. And I just think it's really cool to be able to own that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think you did a good job with that too. I think the fact that he said, I remember one of the conversations, he said, are you worried about Martians invading tomorrow? And you're like, well, no. And you're like, smart ass, no. And he's like, but you understand why I asked the question, right? So and that kind of, I think, dovetailed into the old man story, which, by the way, I really like your stories and how you bring into your own anxiety and depression into them. The old man story where he said, there's always a storm on the horizon. So you need to be prepared, and you need to enjoy the now, right? That's that whole present moment. That's and you're a religious person. Mm-hmm. So, your dad's an Old Testament, you may be more the King David's version, but in the sense that God is presence, right? So I went to Catholic school, and I was confirmed Catholic, and I grew up in the church, and my mom is a devout Catholic. And so I can relate to you on that front. Teaching like meditative ideas around being present, being here, being now. And you were worried about the storms coming back, right? And you asked, well, will they come back? And he said, sometimes, which I thought was such a great answer, because, this story really does, it illustrates what's going on in everyone's head. It's after the storm is gone, you should be happy. You should look up and be like, yeah, everything's cool. The sun's back. But you're like, where's the next one? And how am I going to brace for that? Because it's going to hurt and it's going to suck and I'm going to dive back into this hole. And, that part, I think with John again was where it goes back to that Chucky Will discussion in Good Will Hunting, where he said, dude, you're not doing this for you. You're doing this for me.
Right.
I'm still going to be here when I'm 50. I'm still going to be here, throwing cement blocks off of a concrete. I'm still going to be doing this. And you have a brain. You have a way out. You need to do this for me. And how you tied that to Gabriel was so touching. I thought that was so cool because the Chick-fil-A story, so heartwarming. I mean, it was one of those things where, why don't you tell that story? Because I love that before I move on with Gabriel.
Yeah. So, like we've said, my younger brother, Gabriel, got pneumococcal meningitis when he was 11 months old. And that left him, physically and mentally disabled. And so, he'll technically, according to doctors, never, mature past the age of a 6-year-old, but he's actually, for all abilities, he's very intelligent. And he's an incredibly personable person, which is amazing because, typically when you have brain damage to your frontal lobe, it kind of destroys your personality. And you're usually angry and irritable. But that's not him. And he got a job at Chick-fil-A as a greeter. And he just opens the door for people as they come in. And I went and I visited him one day, and it was just incredible because every single time he opens the door for someone, you can see right away that he has some disabilities. And he smiled at people. He would wave to them. He always wants to fist bump everyone.
That's awesome.
And he loves everybody equally. Right. And that's one thing that I've learned from him that I think is so great. And what really was so important about that day was I was struggling at the time with trying to figure out what the purpose was to my life. And I was still kind of at this time convinced that we sort of had this one thing that we were like destined to do, right? Like Tony Stark beating Thanos, right? Like, right. And I was looking for my Tony Stark moment. I was like, what is it? And when I was watching Gabriel open the door for people and seeing how in that brief moment, this interaction between strangers, how it changed them, how it took away whatever they were worrying about for a minute, and it brought a smile to their face, and it truly touched them, like it truly reached them. I realized that I had this idea of purpose all wrong, and that there's purpose in everything that we do, even the really small, tiny things like opening the door for each other. And being able to learn that from Gabriel and seeing him in doing this work at Chick-fil-A, that was just very, very powerful.
It was, dude. That was a great story, and I think that for me, I could see the visual of him smiling. You mentioned one of his arms is, a bit disabled.
Yeah, he's got CP,
so he can only fist bump. But his smile brought everybody else a smile, and in that moment, they were then present. Right? They weren't present when they're walking in there because they're worried about how many chicken sandwiches they're going to get or the crispy cut fries or whatever they want, and then they see this beautiful. My grandfather referred to kids, men and women that have severe disabilities like this as God's holy innocent. And he referred to them that way. He also is a big devout Catholic, but he said they don't ever judge anyone. And when you look at them, they're not judging you. So what they do, what your brother does for people, and I've never met him obviously, but I have special needs people in my life. My mom used to babysit a little special needs boy, and it was the same thing, is that his reflection is joy. He's happy you're talking to him, right? So he's happy you're paying attention to him. He's looking at you, and there's nothing there except whatever your personal God is. That's where God is. He's like right there. He's smiling. You then forgot about all of the narrative. Whatever's going on in that head, even you suffering from depression, walk into a Chick-fil-A and forget about your stuff for even 30 seconds. Right. That's so important. And I think that's the greatest thing. I want to read this because you wrote this about your brother, and I didn't want to screw it up in the paraphrasing, but it says, there's something in each of us that is unbreakable, that cannot be destroyed by the storms of this world. I already believe that. I've always believed that because of Gabriel. Gabriel defined science. He defined logic. He defined what was supposedly impossible through the strength of his spirit. He taught me that there is a piece of us that is unbreakable if we choose to have faith in our own spirit. And I thought that was magnificent. Because that's, I think, what you're doing, and that's why I was so interested in talking with you, is that you went through hell with this depression. You realized that purpose isn't a missed train. You use that metaphor too. It's always in the station. You can jump on it anytime you want. And this was you were doing this for Gabriel too, not just for you, right?
Right.
You were getting healthy because you're like, yeah, his purpose is to reflect joy to people. And now your purpose, and again, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but from what I read, is that you now want to go out and help people. Because if you can tell people, hey, I went through this, I'm going to tell you about it, and I'm going to show you through my illustrative writing what it was like for me. And then you, by reading this, will feel less alone. And then maybe you'll start to talk to somebody about that. And they won't feel embarrassed. They won't feel, well, I mean, they will. We all do. We're humans.
Right.
But that's the, good for you, dude. I was really happy. I've read a lot of memoirs over the last 3 years because I was writing one. So I've read about 50. And this was really entertaining. I mean, I don't know if you're going to continue to write, but you have some genuine and inherent skills of storytelling. You have a cool voice because it's not pretentious in the least. There's no bitterness. And I think you have, with your faith and kind of what you've overcome, it's an impressive story. And I think it genuinely will help people, specifically more so than I would. Because if I start to talk to somebody, they'd be like, all right, cool, Pops. I don't need to hear your story. Did they have the wheel when you were born? That kind of thing. But, it's cool what you're doing. And I would like to just kind of finish up with this. Are you still in therapy? Where are you in your mental health journey? Like what's going on in your head today?
So I actually, I just stopped going to therapy, just this year. I had really gotten to a point where, I didn't need it anymore. And I was happy about that. I was happy. I really was. The medicine, and I talk about that a little in the book too. I only needed the Klonopin for a little bit. You can only take that short term every day anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was really just to get my sleep back because I was so fried from all those panic attacks. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat.
Really, that's why they came to me too. Yeah.
Yeah. But now I'm just on a very low dose of Cymbalta. I did try to go off of it this past summer, and it actually worked out very, very well. I was off of it for about 4 months. But then I started really kind of feeling it again in the fall. And as I'm sure you know, when you start feeling it, sometimes it can go real quick. Yeah. And I just said, you know what? The old me wouldn't have gone back on the medicine because he would have seen that as a failure.
Out. Man, push your feelings down.
Push the feelings down. Yeah, exactly. I was like, that's what the old me would have done. I was like, I'm going to be a little bit smarter and I'm just going to get back on this because there really is a chemistry component as well, right? That is absolutely true. And I started taking it again, and within a week and a half, I started feeling better. So that's kind of where I am. I don't go to the therapy anymore, and I'm on a very low dose of antidepressants. And that seems to really do the trick for me.
That's fantastic, dude. Again, I really appreciate your time. I think what you're doing is awesome. The world needs it right now, I think more than ever. And minding the mind, obviously doing some great stuff. So keep doing all that. Keep helping everybody. And congrats on your recent nuptials with Erica. I think
Thank
that's
you.
obviously a great story. Keep touching toes.
Yeah.
I think that was really cute.
Yeah.
But I will let you go back to your life. And if you and Erica ever get out to San Francisco, drop me an email and we'll hang out. I promise you and your wife we won't talk about depression the whole time.
That sounds good to me. And
it was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me on your show. I appreciate it. I love doing this kind of stuff. And I look forward to reading your book as well.
Thanks, man. I'll make sure send you an autographed copy.
I would love that.
All right, man. Cheers.
All right. Have a good one.